Hi guys, it's Stuart from Mr. T Does Primary History here with the second of the home learning packs. This inquiry is all about the themes that we can find that run through British history from prehistory through to the end of our Key Stage 2 curriculum, which is when William the Conqueror wins the Battle of Hastings in the year 1066. This is very open-ended, so children can choose which theme they'd like to study more in depth. Let's get started. This video is aimed at Key Stage 2 children from Year 3 up to Year 6. It's open-ended, so the outcome is up to you. There are no fixed requirements for that, and it can obviously be presented however you would like. It'll take at least a day's worth of work, so spread it out over a couple of days or do one day in depth. So let's take a look at some of the key ideas we need to remember. First, a chronological narrative, so that's the story of British history, and we need to think of it flowing like it would in a story. Just remember that the story is true, and today is part of it, because our story keeps going. Periodization. This is where we break history into periods of time that are around a key change or action. The duration is the amount of time something lasts for. In this case, it's periods of history, or it might be single lives. The interval is the amount of time between two things happening. You might see that when you go and watch something at a theatre, or the interval between two parts of a TV programme. And then the scale of time is where we add some kind of mathematical scale, and that helps us understand interval and duration because we can see it in a physical way. I'll make sure I attach a copy of this to the PDF so you can make reference to them. So, what did we learn about in Key Stage 1? The lives of significant people, a single event beyond living memories, that's one further in the past, changes within living memories, so that's changes from now looking back over the last 80 to 100 years, and then some aspects of your locality's past, so that will very much be dependent on where you live and what it's known for. Let's take a look at what that would look like on a timeline. So, here you can see a timeline with a scale across the top, AD in green and BC in blue. This is a plotting of the Key Stage 1 teaching that might have taken place. What do you notice about it? They're all quite modern. They're in AD over the last few hundred years. The duration of each is very short, and they all do fit together to form a framework where they fit before, after, or alongside each other. On here, I've added a bar to represent changes within living memory. That's the top orange one. The Great Fire of London, which is the very small rectangle in the middle. And then the lives of significant individuals are Captain Cook and Amy Johnson. You might have learned about different events and significant individuals, so don't worry if you did. These are just an example, and it's not a problem. But they are really interesting, so if you haven't learned about them, possibly something that you might want to look into. Now, let's recap on those key principles before we move on to look at Key Stage 2. So, in Key Stage 2, our focus changes, and we'll just have a quick recap of that language to listen out for. So, a period of history is where we break history into periods of time around a key change or action. An empire is where one state or country takes charge and rules a range of states. Conquest is where one state or group uses military force to invade and take control over another. Interval is the amount of time between two things happening. Duration is the amount of time something lasts for. The scale of history is where we think of history having a mathematical scale to help us understand interval and duration. And then invasion and settlement is where a group takes charge of another country by invading it, so that's using military force to attack. Here once again is our blank timeline. Now if you look closely you can see that it's the same one that we saw for Key Stage 1, and it's going to be just focusing on British history. Now in Key Stage 2 we look at world history, but that is not our emphasis today. Let's have a look at how the chronology builds up. The earliest period of British history is known as prehistory, and it includes the Stone Ages, Bronze Age and Iron Age. They are far larger than I can show on the screen, so imagine it going out of the screen, down the wall, and out of your house and down the street, and you'll get somewhere quite close. In the Paleolithic, people lived a nomadic lifestyle, so they moved around because Britain was still connected to Europe, used tools made from flint and bone, and then things started to change in the Mesolithic, where tools became smaller and more varied, using what are called microliths, and in the Neolithic, farming began, which was an almighty change as people started to settle in this period. In the Bronze Age, people started to use metal. This made tools and things easier because they were stronger, but bronze was not easy to make, which is why in the Iron Age things became even easier and people started to war more because their weapons were stronger, easier and faster to make, so more people could have access to them. The end of the Iron Age comes when somebody invades. Let's have a look at that now. You can see another bar has been added onto our timeline. This represents the Roman period. Julius Caesar attempted to invade in 55 BC but was defeated and went back to Gaul, which is modern day France. Emperor Claudius was more successful in 43 AD, and by 80 AD or so, Britain had mostly been conquered. During this period, Britain became part of the wider Roman Empire, which covered most of Europe and parts of northern Africa into the Middle East. This changed Britain a lot. We had larger towns, there was the introduction of Roman luxuries such as sanitation, bathhouses, and the infamous very straight roads. It's really important to remember this was very different to the Iron Age culture, where Britain was not one country but lots of disparate tribes who fought against each other and did not work as one unified group. Some Celtic tribes in Britain fought back against the Romans and others cooperated with them. It's quite interesting to find out what your local tribe did. We can still see the legacy of prehistory and the Romans around us if we look carefully. I'd thoroughly recommend looking at the English Heritage website, which I have linked below. At the end of the Roman period, Rome itself was in danger, and the Roman legions left Britain in 410 AD. When the Britons asked for help from the then Roman emperor, he sent a very famous letter, which told them to look to their own defences. By this time, most Britons could be classed as Romans, so the Roman legions left, but not the people themselves. That is quite a common mistake. The next group to invade Britain came from parts of northern Europe, such as Germany, Denmark and the Netherlands. They were the Angles, Saxons and Jutes, who collectively tend to be called the Anglo-Saxons. They began arriving and eventually took control of Britain, and it returned it from being part of an empire to smaller tribal kingdoms such as Northumbria, Mercia and Wessex, which were three of the most powerful. Originally they started off as pagans, which meant they worshipped different gods to the Christian Romans, but over time they became Christians as well and were very religious. Most of the written records we get from this period come from the monks, who were some of the few people that were able to read, write, so therefore the history is very much from their perspective. It's definitely worth taking a look at some of the jewellery and craftsmanship from the Anglo-Saxons, as it is utterly, utterly beautiful. You'll notice the next bar runs concurrently with the Anglo-Saxons, who are in blue. This represents the Vikings. They initially began by raiding on the wealthy monasteries that could be found around the coast, such as Lindisfarne. However, later in the period, a great army arrived and tried to take control over the country. Eventually, they had conquered most of it, but thanks to the work of Alfred the Great and the following kings of Wessex, the country was split into two parts, the Danelaw and Wessex. By the end of this period, the Anglo-Saxons had regained control over much, if not all, of the country. This is where we come to the end of our narrative for now. At the end of the Saxon period, there were three contenders for the throne of England. Duke William of Normandy, an important Saxon duke called Harold Godwinson, and a Viking called Harald Hardrada. Duke William of Normandy won and became the first Norman king of Britain. Now that we've explored the chronology of this period, let's take a look at some of the themes we might want to look into. You could compare daily life, homes and settlements, warriors and war, religion, or if you've got a different idea, feel free to look into that. I've given you a very, very quick outline of the chronology of this period, so you will have to do further research. What next? Choose your theme that you want to research. Think about what you're aiming to find out before you start, and make sure you try and use more than one source to find the information to make sure it supports each other. Record your findings and identify any similarities and differences. Thanks a lot for watching, and hopefully I will see you again soon. Bye.